As long as my life endures, I will remain a student. To seek knowledge is to seek learning, and to seek learning is to renew and develop oneself. Yet when a person stops learning, they die while still alive. I greet you all from the bottom of my heart. In Europe, the prehistoric era represents a long period during which writing had not yet become widespread, and societies are primarily known through archaeological evidence, linguistic families, and the records of civilizations with which they came into contact. In this era, the entities referred to as tribes were not modern nations, but rather large human communities organized around a shared language, culture, belief system, and way of life. The Celts were among the oldest and most widespread peoples of Iron Age Europe. Emerging in Central Europe from the 2nd millennium BCE onward, they gradually expanded into Western and Southern Europe. Present-day France, ancient Gaul, the British Isles, the Iberian Peninsula, and northern Italy constituted the core regions of the Celtic world. Agriculture, advanced metalworking, and a warrior aristocracy formed the foundations of Celtic society. Following Roman conquests, the continental Celts were largely assimilated, while cultural continuity was preserved in Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. The Germanic peoples originated in northern Europe and began to appear on the historical stage from the 1st millennium BCE onward. Initially inhabiting Scandinavia and northern Germany, the Germanic peoples developed a tribal, warrior-based social structure. They engaged in prolonged frontier conflicts with the Roman Empire. During the migration period, Germanic groups such as the Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Vandals, Franks, and Angles fundamentally transformed the political map of Europe. The ethnic and linguistic foundations of modern Germany, England, and the Scandinavian countries are rooted in the Germanic peoples. The Vikings were, in fact, the Scandinavian branch of the Germanic world. Between the 8th and 11th centuries CE, they became prominent through their maritime activities. Thanks to their longships, they reached regions stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the Black Sea, establishing a vast sphere of influence through raiding, trade, and settlement. Although the Vikings emerged after the classical phase of the migration period, they played a decisive role in the transformation of early medieval Europe. The Normans, the Rus principalities, and the kingdoms of England were all products of this Viking legacy. The Slavs were among the last major ethnic groups to enter Europe's historical record. From the 5th and 6th centuries CE onward, they expanded across Central and Eastern Europe. The demographic and political vacuums created by the migration period facilitated Slavic settlement. Organized primarily around agriculture and tribal federations, the Slavs eventually divided into Eastern, Western, and Southern branches. Modern Russians, Poles, Serbs, and Bulgarians are the descendants of this broad Slavic world. The Latins were one of the indigenous peoples of the Italian peninsula, originating in the region surrounding the city of Rome. Initially a small community, they came to dominate the Mediterranean world through the expansion of the Roman Republic and later the Roman Empire. Even after the migration period, Latin identity endured through language and law. Modern Italians, French, Spaniards, and Romanians are the inheritors of Latin cultural heritage. The Huns were not of European origin but constituted a nomadic confederation that emerged from the Central Asian steppes. Their arrival in Europe in the 4th century CE served as the primary catalyst for the Great Migration. Pressure from the Huns pushed Germanic and other peoples into Roman territories. Through their mounted warfare techniques, highly mobile military organization, and political coercion, they profoundly destabilized the settled order of Europe. Under the leadership of Attila, the Huns became one of the most powerful forces on the continent. Before the Great Migration, Europe was sustained by a balance between the Roman-centered settled order and the surrounding so-called barbarian peoples. After the migrations, this balance collapsed. The Western Roman Empire fell, and ethnically based kingdoms emerged. While Germanic peoples established political dominance, Latin culture survived through language and religion. The Slavs filled much of Eastern Europe, and the Huns, followed by steppe peoples such as the Avars and Bulgars, played a decisive role in shaping the course of European history. Foundations of the Indo-European world. The Indo-European concept, more than a language family. The concept of Indo-European constitutes one of the most comprehensive explanatory frameworks developed by modern history and linguistics. This term does not refer to a single people, state, or political structure. Rather, it denotes a vast language family derived from an unwritten proto-language spoken thousands of years ago. Yet even this definition remains insufficient. Language is not merely a tool of communication, it is also a carrier of culture, mentality, belief systems, and social organization. For this reason, the Indo-European concept inevitably possesses a historical and cultural dimension. Today, Indo-European languages are spoken across an enormous geographical expanse stretching from Western Europe to the Indian subcontinent. English, German, French, Spanish, Russian, Greek, Persian, and Hindi all belong to this family. The idea that languages spoken across such a vast territory could originate from a common source points to an unparalleled process of expansion in human history. One point must be emphasized with particular clarity: Indo-European is not a race. During the 19th century, this concept was distorted through ideological and racist interpretations. Pseudoscientific ideas such as the notion of an Aryan race transformed the Indo-European language family into a claim of biological superiority. Modern scholarship unequivocally rejects these approaches. Today, the term Indo-European refers exclusively to a historical phenomenon defined by linguistic kinship. The critical insight here is that communities speaking the same language do not necessarily share a common genetic origin. Language may spread through conquest, elite dominance, cultural prestige, or economic advantage. The expansion of Indo-European languages occurred largely through these mechanisms rather than through large-scale population replacement. Therefore, understanding the Indo-European phenomenon is not merely a linguistic curiosity. It provides insight into the deep structural foundations of European and Asian history, helping to explain why certain societies share similar mythological motifs, comparable social hierarchies, and analogous political reflexes. Proto-Indo-European society and the steppe world. Proto-Indo-European society represents a prehistoric community without written sources, yet one that can be substantially reconstructed through linguistics, archaeology, and genetics. The geographical homeland of this society is generally identified as the Eurasian steppe zone between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. This region was only marginally suitable for agriculture but exceptionally well adapted to pastoralism and mobile lifeways. The steppe environment played a decisive role in shaping the Indo-European mentality. Open landscapes, exposed settlements, and large herds fostered societies characterized by high mobility, warfare, and patriarchal organization. The Proto-Indo-European individual was not primarily a settled peasant but rather a pastoralist warrior. The domestication of the horse constituted a revolutionary development for this society. The horse did not merely accelerate transportation, it fundamentally transformed the nature of warfare. Mounted warriors gained a decisive advantage over infantry-based forces, enabling Indo-European groups to exert sustained military pressure over neighboring populations. Linguistic reconstructions demonstrate that Proto-Indo-European possessed shared vocabulary for horses, wheels, carts, axles, and harnesses. This indicates a society that was technologically simple yet strategically formidable, capable of exploiting mobility and logistics to maximum effect. The social structure was patriarchal. A male warrior elite monopolized both economic and religious authority. Although women played crucial roles in production and household economies, political power remained centered on male dominance. Traces of this structure can later be observed in European aristocratic traditions as well as in the caste system of South Asia. The Great Divergence, the emergence of Indo-European branches. The Indo-European world did not remain a unified entity. Population growth, climatic fluctuations, and internal competition triggered successive waves of separation and migration. This process of divergence unfolded over millennia, with each branch evolving in distinct ways within new geographical contexts. Groups migrating westward reached Central Europe via the Balkans, where the Celtic, Germanic, and Italic branches emerged. These populations intermixed with indigenous Neolithic communities, yet they imposed their languages and elite cultural structures upon the regions they entered. Southern migrations led into Anatolia, where early Indo-European speaking states such as the Hittites were established. The Hittites are of exceptional importance, as they produced the earliest written records of any Indo-European language. Eastern migrations carried Indo-European speakers onto the Iranian plateau and into the Indian subcontinent, giving rise to Vedic culture and the Sanskrit language. This branch produced some of the most influential religious and philosophical texts within the Indo-European tradition. This long and complex process of divergence explains why the Indo-European world is not a monolithic civilization but rather a diverse family of related cultures. Indo-European mythology and the shared mental universe. Indo-European mythology reflects the shared mental framework of these societies. One of its most prominent figures is the Sky Father deity. Zeus, Jupiter, Dyaus Ptah, and Tyr represent different cultural manifestations of the same primordial figure. A central theme in this mythology is the conflict between order and chaos. A dragon or serpent-like creature embodying chaos is defeated by a god or hero representing cosmic order. This narrative serves as the mythological expression of the Indo-European warrior ethic and its conception of social and cosmic order. The gods are anthropomorphic, they fight, feel anger, and dispense punishment. This human-centered structure reveals a worldview in which divine authority mirrors human social relations. This mentality would later find philosophical expression in Greek thought and institutional form in Roman law. The Indo-Europeanization of Europe and its historical consequences. The arrival of Indo-European speakers in Europe did not occur through genocide or total population replacement. Instead, it unfolded primarily through elite dominance. Indigenous populations continued to exist, but they adopted Indo-European languages and political cultures. This process fundamentally shaped Europe's linguistic landscape, mythological traditions, social hierarchies, political reflexes. In this sense, the Indo-European legacy constitutes one of the deepest and most enduring foundations of European civilization. The Germanic world, the silent architecture that shaped Europe. Opening lecture, International Congress of History. Today we have gathered to reflect upon one of the most profound, enduring, and yet persistently misunderstood forces in European history, the Germanic world. Throughout this lecture, I invite you to consider the Germanic peoples not merely as so-called barbarians who assaulted the frontiers of the Roman Empire, but rather as historical actors who fundamentally shaped Europe's political structures, social hierarchies, cultural mentalities, and long-term historical trajectory. Without an understanding of the Germanic world, it is impossible to fully comprehend medieval Europe, the emergence of modern nation-states, or the intellectual foundations of European civilization itself. The Germanic peoples did not suddenly appear on the stage of history, destroy Rome, and vanish into obscurity. On the contrary, they were the product of a long process of ethnogenesis, gradual cultural formation, and sustained historical transformation stretching across millennia. For this reason, any serious discussion must begin with their ethnological origins, for without this foundation, all subsequent developments risk being misunderstood or oversimplified. The Germanic peoples belonged to the Germanic branch of the Indo-European language family. It is crucial to emphasize, however, that Germanic does not denote a single race or biological entity. Rather, it refers to a cultural and linguistic identity shaped by shared traditions, mythologies, social structures, and collective mental frameworks. One of the greatest errors of modern historiography has been to treat the Germanic peoples as a homogeneous group. In reality, the Germanic world consisted of numerous tribes and confederations, diverse in local customs yet united by a common cultural core. Archaeological evidence, linguistic reconstruction, and genetic research trace Germanic ethnogenesis back to the Nordic Bronze Age, approximately between 1700 and 500 BCE. Southern Scandinavia, the Jutland Peninsula, and northern Germany constitute the geographical heartland of this process. In these regions, indigenous Neolithic farming communities interacted over long periods with Indo-European steppe elements. Through this sustained interaction emerged a distinct Germanic cultural universe characterized by a warrior ethos, patriarchal social organization, a close relationship with nature, and tribal political structures. When Roman authors first described the Germanic peoples, their terminology reflected a Roman-centered worldview. The term Germani, first employed by Julius Caesar, was a Roman construct designed to categorize the unfamiliar societies beyond the Rhine. The Germanic peoples themselves did not recognize such a broad collective identity. For a Frank, a Goth, or a Saxon, loyalty was directed primarily toward one's tribe, lineage, and war leader rather than toward any abstract ethnic category. Geography played a decisive role in shaping Germanic society. Their early settlements lay within vast forest belts, marshlands, and regions marked by harsh climatic conditions. Stretching from southern Scandinavia to the Rhine basin, these environments limited agricultural productivity but favored pastoralism, hunting, and seasonal mobility. As a result, Germanic societies developed a semi-settled way of life. They were neither fully nomadic steppe peoples nor fully urbanized sedentary civilizations like Rome. Villages formed the basic unit of settlement, but environmental pressures, population growth, and resource constraints periodically compelled movement. Within this context, confrontation with Rome was inevitable. The Roman Empire viewed the Rhine and Danube not merely as geographical boundaries but as civilizational frontiers separating order from chaos, civilization from barbarism. From Rome's perspective, the Germanic world was a space to be conquered, controlled, or exploited. From the Germanic perspective, Rome represented both a looming threat and a powerful economic magnet. Economic inequality constituted one of the fundamental sources of conflict between the two worlds. Rome possessed advanced agriculture, cities, roads, monetary systems, and bureaucratic institutions. Germanic societies, by contrast, relied on mixed subsistence economies centered on agriculture and livestock, operated largely through barter, and generated limited surplus. This imbalance fueled raids along the Roman frontiers, which should not be dismissed as mere acts of banditry. For Germanic groups, such incursions were strategies of survival, resource acquisition, and political advancement. Political organization further accentuated the divide. Rome was centralized, legalistic, and bureaucratic. Germanic societies revolved around tribal assemblies, warrior elites, and charismatic leadership. Authority derived not from written law but from personal valor, military success, and ancestral tradition. Roman attempts to tax Germanic populations, employ them as buffer forces, or integrate them into imperial structures were perceived as existential threats to Germanic autonomy. These tensions culminated in a series of defining conflicts. In the late 2nd century BCE, the victories of the Cimbri and Teutons over Roman armies shocked the Roman world. Yet the symbolic apex of Germanic resistance occurred in 9 CE, when Arminius led a coalition of Germanic forces to annihilate 3 Roman legions in the Teutoburg forest. This defeat marked the definitive end of Roman ambitions to conquer Germania east of the Rhine. In the aftermath, Roman-Germanic relations entered a new phase. Rome abandoned direct conquest in favor of frontier defense, diplomacy, and the selective integration of Germanic elites. Germanic warriors served in Roman armies, Roman culture penetrated Germanic societies, and Germanic leaders adopted Roman titles. This interaction did not erase Germanic identity, rather, it transformed it. By the 4th century CE, pressure from the Huns sweeping westward from the Eurasian steppes destabilized the Germanic world. This pressure triggered the migration period, forcing Germanic groups into Roman territory. Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Vandals, Burgundians, and Franks established kingdoms within the former empire. The Battle of Adrianople in 378, in which a Roman emperor fell to Germanic forces, symbolized the collapse of the ancient world order. The sacks of Rome in 410 and 455 carried immense symbolic weight. Yet interpreting these events as the destruction of Rome by barbarians is deeply misleading. The Germanic peoples did not annihilate Roman civilization, they inherited, adapted, and reshaped it. Medieval Europe emerged from the synthesis of Roman institutions and Germanic traditions. Northern Europe, particularly Scandinavia, represented the cultural and mythological core of the Germanic world. The Viking Age constituted a maritime reconfiguration of the Germanic legacy, extending its influence from the Atlantic to the Black Sea. Through trade, settlement, and conquest, Germanic culture left a lasting imprint across vast regions. Economically, Germanic societies combined agriculture, pastoralism, and trade. Barley, wheat, and oats formed the agricultural base, cattle and pigs dominated animal husbandry, horses played a critical role in warfare. Trade with Rome connected the Germanic world to the Mediterranean economy, with amber, furs, and slaves serving as key commodities. Religion provides crucial insight into the Germanic mindset. Germanic belief systems were polytheistic, nature-centered, and deeply martial in character. Deities such as Odin, Thor, and Tyr embodied the values of wisdom, strength, justice, and warfare. The belief in Valhalla sanctified honorable death and reinforced the warrior ethic that defined Germanic society. In conclusion, the Germanic peoples were not merely agents of destruction but architects of transformation. By merging their traditions with the Roman legacy, they laid the foundations of medieval Europe. Feudal structures, monarchic authority, aristocratic values, and the cultural cores of modern European nations all bear the imprint of the Germanic historical experience. To understand the Germanic world is to understand Europe itself, and, by extension, the roots of the modern world. Dear audience, today I would like to discuss one of the most misunderstood and ideologically charged aspects of European history, which is also one of the cornerstones of modern Europe, the political and legal mindset of the Germanic world. Specifically, we must question the extent to which the image of the barbarian Germans, which frequently appears in Roman sources and is still perpetuated in popular historical narratives, truly reflects historical reality. Because to define the Germans as barbarians not only belittles them, but also makes it impossible to understand the political and legal foundations of medieval Europe. First and foremost, let me make it clear, the Germans were not Romans. They did not have a centralized state structure, a written legal system, or an urbanized social order like Rome. However, this does not mean that the Germans lacked political thought, legal norms, or a concept of order. On the contrary, the Germanic world produced a political culture that was different from Rome but highly coherent, functional, and historically effective. The reason Roman historians and statesmen referred to the Germans as barbarians lies in Rome's belief that its political measures were universal. For the Romans, politics meant written laws, permanent institutions, bureaucratic hierarchies, and central authority. Any structure outside of these parameters was perceived as incomplete, primitive, or dangerous. However, Germanic political culture was not state-centered, it was community-centered. Power did not reside in an abstract state, but in concrete human relations, oaths, bonds of loyalty, and shared traditions. At the heart of the Germanic political order was not a written constitution or a palace, but a popular assembly known as the Thing. The Thing was the clearest expression of Germanic political thought. Here, wars were declared, peace was made, leaders were approved or rejected, legal disputes were resolved, and traditions were verbally reaffirmed. The Thing is not a modern parliament, but it did contain some of the key elements of modern parliamentary tradition. The collective decision-making process, reliance on the consent of free men, and the non-absolute nature of leadership were some of the most distinctive features of Germanic political culture. The Germanic kingship has also been misunderstood in this context. A Germanic king was not a figure with absolute powers like a Roman emperor, nor was he sacralized. A king's legitimacy depended more on his achievements and acceptance within the tribe than on his lineage. A king who failed in battle could not distribute spoils, or failed to uphold the honor of his people could quickly lose the support of his followers. This shows that, in Germanic politics, power was conditional and subject to oversight. This understanding laid the foundation for the first among equals model of kingship that would shape European feudalism in later centuries. Perhaps one of the most powerful elements of Germanic political culture was the personal loyalty between the warrior aristocracy and their leaders. This relationship was based not on written contracts but on mutual oaths. For the Germanic warrior, political loyalty was not directed toward an abstract state, but toward a concrete leader. However, this loyalty was not blind obedience. The leader had to be brave in battle, distribute the spoils, and defend the honor of the community. If not, loyalty would dissolve. This system was different from Rome's bureaucratic understanding of loyalty, but it was highly effective during times of crisis. Another reason the Romans labeled the Germans as barbarians was the absence of written law among them. In the face of the grandeur of Roman law, the Germans' oral tradition appeared primitive. However, Germanic law was not arbitrary. On the contrary, it was a detailed system that took into account social balance. Crime was not seen as an individual matter, but as an issue between communities. Therefore, punishment was not individualistic but conciliatory and aimed at restoring balance. The blood feud, from a modern perspective, may seem like a chaotic spiral of violence, but in the Germanic world, it was governed by specific rules. More importantly, the Wehrgild or blood price system was a mechanism that limited violence and controlled conflict. The cost of a crime was compensated by a payment between the parties, thereby preventing an endless cycle of revenge. Although this approach is different from modern criminal law, it served the purpose of maintaining social peace. Now, we come to the critical point, the legacy of Germanic law in medieval Europe. With the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the centralized Roman legal system practically disappeared from Europe. However, this did not create a legal vacuum. On the contrary, Germanic law provided a flexible foundation that adapted to Europe's new political realities. The Franks, Visigoths, Ostrogoths, and other Germanic kingdoms did not completely reject Roman law. Instead, they blended it with their own traditions. The feudal legal system that emerged in medieval Europe was largely a legacy of Germanic law. The personal nature of law, that is, the determination of which law an individual was subject to based on their ethnicity and social position, continued the Germanic tradition. Likewise, the idea that the king was not above the law but a part of it also comes from the Germanic political culture. In medieval times, the king was not the creator of the law but the protector of it. This idea did not arise from Roman imperial tradition but from Germanic legal thinking. The fact that feudal lords had legal authority over their own lands, the prevalence of local courts, and the dominance of traditional law over written law are all clear signs of the Germanic legacy. Even the English common law system traces its roots largely to Anglo-Saxon Germanic law. Elements like the jury system, local testimony, and the priority of customary law are all traces of Germanic legal thought that extended into the medieval and modern periods. Thus, the Germans were not the barbarians who destroyed Rome, they were the historical agents who built post-Roman Europe. Without their political and legal culture, neither the feudal order nor the modern European monarchies would have taken the shape they did. The Germanic world left behind not a centralized empire but a political legacy based on balance, negotiation, and personal responsibility. In conclusion, we can say this: the Germans were not barbarians. They were bearers of a civilization model different from Rome. This model, based on tradition rather than written law, on community rather than the absolute state, and on honor rather than abstract rules, shaped the deep structure of European history. Today, when we talk about the rule of law, the limited powers of the king, and societal consent in Europe, the intellectual legacy of the Germans is as important as that of Rome.